In this video, I'm going to highlight the new features in GTViewer version 20, which will soon be available for beta testing. GTViewer version 20 has a new look. There's new icons on the toolbars. The menu items have icons for each of the commands. The query menu lets you define your own custom icon for each individual query. And so do the applications, that you can put your own specific bitmap here for each one of the applications in your list. The biggest change in version 20 is that GTViewer has changed from a windowed view to a tabbed view. And you'll see here we only have one window, so there's one tab. If we create a new window, and let me zoom out a little bit, then we can switch between the tabs and there's two different views. Now you can drag a tab off and have them simultaneously displayed, and you can do various assortments of how you break these tiles up into different views. Version 20 also provides a new feature with the attribute info mode. Now, it doesn't matter how you do your attribute info, whether with the attribute info mode or a right mouse click in the view. I'm going to right click on a poll, and you'll see that I have customized what it shows for the selection. Now I've got the poll number, the class, and the height. You can put anything you want as long as the attributes are on the data for that feature. And let me click in a more congested area so we can see a little more. Here's two primary conductors in the same spot, but you can tell which one's which. This one's circuit B, this one's circuit A. It's also got the phase and the voltage. Now by default you just get the feature name, but you can customize that however you like. And it also shows in the attribute info dialog in the title bar. So if you have multiple features displayed, let me select a different one, you can tell which one is which just from looking at the title bar. Version 20 also has a new mode, and it's called the proximity info mode or the proximity search. And I'm going to select it. You'll notice a little dialog shows up on the right. You can move this around wherever you want. But on my cursor there's a little circle, and this circle is a radius that I've specified over here in the box. There's 50 feet. You can choose from different things, and you can customize what this list is. I'm going to leave it at 50. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to click in the view, and you'll notice it highlighted everything in that circle that is inside, or every feature inside that circle. And as I move over the features, it will highlight which one it is over there in the dialog. Now if I click on one, it'll do an attribute info. Or if I do it the other way, I can click on one of the items in the list and it will flicker which one it is. And if I double click on it, it will also do the attribute info. Proximity search is the combination of the feature counting and just the attribute info so that you can more easily determine what's in an area. And you know, it may or may not have a use for you, but if you're trying to find certain things and you don't want to keep doing attribute info, you can see immediately what they are without having to do anything. And just like the attribute info lets you customize what the name was, that same mechanism works for the proximity features, and you can show whichever attribute information you want for each of the feature types. Now you have to define them, but you can define them. By default, it'll just be blank and give you the feature name. The next big change in GTViewer 20 is the display manager. In the past, we've had the display filter, and then in version 15 we had the display filter and a display manager, and in version 20 we're just going to have the display manager because everything's been integrated into one dialog. And I'll switch over here to it, and let me close out the proximity information, and let's just quickly run through all the tabs. And a lot of this is similar to the display manager in 15, but there are some new features that have been added, and it works a little bit differently, hopefully better. So we have a list of categories. You can turn categories on and off just with a click. I can turn off the land base, I can turn on topography, I can turn off the primary, whatever I want. I could turn everything off and turn on gas. There's no gas in that area. There's a fiber. I could do structures and so on. I can also say go back to my default, and it'll turn it back to what it was when I created the session. And the next tab is presets. This one's probably pretty self-explanatory, and this one's no different than the one in version 15. I can select a preset from the list. Here's electric, here's fiber. There's really not much in this area other than electric. There's a little bit better there for fiber. And as I said, this one's no different than the previous versions. Display toggles was also in version 15. This allows you to define groups of features that you can toggle on and off. Now, these show that you'll notice electric has a light blue and says partial. That means some of the toggle items are on. If I click it, it'll turn all of them on, and if I click it again, it'll turn them all off. I could turn the land base off. And these are not presets. These are what I've defined to toggle on and off with the display toggles. You've been able to do this with toolbox buttons in the past, but you've been able to do it in the display manager since version 15. The next item is the features tab, and this is probably the most used, maybe, or the most used by administrators, maybe I should say, because it gives you individual element control either at the feature level or the component level or the filter ID level. And if we look here, I'll try to find some stuff to turn off. Here's primary conductor. If I click it, it'll turn it off. Click it again, it turns it back on. I could turn several things off or back on. I could turn everything off and just turn on what I wanted. Let's say I wanted the customers, fuses, conductor, capacitors, and breakers. And I will reset that back to the default. And that is by feature. And a feature can be composed of more than one component. And that's why some of these are partial, because like secondary conductor doesn't have all of the components turned on, but some of them are. If I switch over here to the feature component view, you'll see that it has a different view because it's got each individual component listed. And if we go down to the secondary customer, the text was turned off, and that's why it's partially on over here. So let me scroll back down there to it. We could turn that on if we wanted. I don't think there's any in the view here. It works no different than the other one, other than it's at the component level instead of the entire feature level. The next tab is the In View tab. Now, previously this was only in the old display filter. This has been moved over to the display manager, and it's a little more sophisticated. And it also works real time, so I can keep zooming around in my data, and it will keep updating to keep track of what's going on in the view. Now, how is this different from just the regular feature tab? Well, it's counting only what's in the view. So if I zoom in pretty close, there's just a few things that are shown. And it also tells you how many are displayed, how many are turned off because you've either turned them off or they're off by a min-max threshold, and it also tells how many of those were turned off by a min-max threshold. And it's got the feature, the component, and you can do feature component mode, you can do feature mode, or you can do filter ID mode. And you can turn the features on and off here as well. I can turn off the primary conductor, I could turn off poles, etc. I could also say turn off just the pole text or the primary conductor text, and so on. The next tab is Raster. This shows you any non-category raster or category raster that you have defined in your data. Now, this says the raster is hidden. That's because the hide raster button has been turned on. So if I turn it on, then I can control them here as well. And I'm going to turn that back off. And the next new tab is the Dynamic Graphics tab. And the Dynamics Graphics tab shows you any dynamic graphic action that is available. And in the past, you could only do this through the Dynamic Graphics interface or through a toolbox button that could just toggle on and off a dynamic graphics action, whether that's a label or a highlight. Now this is just like the dynamic graphic interface, at least for turning them on and off and restoring them to their default settings. So if I wanted to turn off the primary conductor labels, which is a dynamic graphic label right here, I'm going to click that. It goes off. The next one is a zoomed out version. I could also turn on other dynamic graphic actions. This one highlights the circuits by or the primary conductor by phase, or by circuit ID, I'm sorry. And see, if I turn it off, they go back to normal. If I turn them on, they're colored by circuit ID. You can also use the emphasize mode, and you can only see that. Here's another one, pole over 40 feet, which is pretty much most of the poles in this view. And I'll turn all those back off, and I'll turn my emphasize mode off. And that's the new display manager. There have also been some changes to the Redline drawing. The biggest change is that the style, color, and weight selection, which used to be on the toolbar up here, has been moved to the drawing info dialog. So if I select a drawing mode, and you can move this wherever you like, the properties are now here instead of on the toolbar. And the drawing info dialog was here before, it just didn't have this setting in it. It kind of gets it out of the way, and it's always available with and in the context of what you're doing. So if I draw a shape, it also shows you the length as you draw, the segment length, and the angle. Now another new thing here is that I can hit the backspace key, and it will remove the last point that I drew. And then I can draw another one. And a right click will complete it, and also the enter key will now complete it. Let's draw one more thing. I'll draw a circle. And let's change the color to, let's say, blue, and I'll make it a solid line this time. And that's how it works. Now, another thing that's different is there is a unlimited undo redo. In the past versions, all past versions of GTViewer, you could undo the last drawn element, and then you could undo that, which would place it back. But now it works more like a word processor or any other or modern application, where I can undo however far back I want, at least as long as the history's there, like from this when the session was started. And then I can also redo it as long as I haven't placed any new features in there. So let's try that. There's two buttons on the toolbar now, a undo and a redo. This I went to the wrong ones to start with. This one is previous view location and next view location, but here's undo and redo. And I'm going to undo that blue circle. If I do it again, it'll undo the red circle. You know, I can keep going all the way back till there's nothing. But I can then go to the redo and then put it all back. And it's more than just drawing a feature. Let's say I edit this line and I move that point and I move that point. I can undo that. I can also rotate that and scale it, and I can undo that as well. And if I keep undoing, it'll just go back to the beginning, and I can come back to do everything that I had done. Now if you draw something new after you've backed up, then anything past that's gone. And there are some limitations, like if you import a GTG file into your session graphics, it does reset the undo point to there because it doesn't want to maintain such, you could import a very large file and it doesn't want to deal with that. So if you're going to do that, just remember your undo redo will be reset to that point. One additional feature that's been added is the Redline search, and this search will go through any text or embedded data that you've drawn in your view with Redlines. Now I'm going to clear off what I've got there, and I'm going to draw some text. And I'm going to draw several just so we'll have a few to try. Doesn't matter how big they are. And I'll do another one of those just for good measure. Now, this is just text, and it's kind of hard to tell where they are unless you do your emphasize mode. It's these three here. Now, the button on the toolbar is the red binoculars. If I click that, it will let me do a search. Now, it remembered my last search, is why it had that in there. But if I search for DEF, I can say search the text, search the embedded data, which is data you've embedded on your session graphics, either through an app or through the attribute properties up here. I can also search both, but I'm going to just search the text. You can tell it how to do the search: contains, begins with, ends with, exact match, or only search in the view, which is this check. I'm going to let it search everything, and it found 2 with the right query match, which was the DEF. Now, if I said ABC, it should find all of them because they all have ABC in them. If you click on one, it will locate on it, just like a regular query. This used to be an add-on app, but it's been completely integrated into the product. There's one last new feature in GTViewer version 20 that I want to go over, and that's some dynamic graphics functionality that has been put directly in GTViewer, and you no longer have to use the dynamic graphics interface to do these certain operations. Now, we've already seen some of this in the display manager on the dynamic graphics tab, and this is just a couple more things that are provided for you that in the past you had to have the add-on app of the dynamic graphics interface. And this gives you a little bit more functionality in what you can do without having to have that interface installed. So under Tools, there is a dynamic graphics menu item, and there's 2 items under here. There's an import dynamic graphics, which will import a dynamic graphics definition file, and there's also a restore dynamic graphics, which returns it to the state when the session was created, which is what's defined in the GTM file. This information, or these 2 features, are both in the dynamic graphics interface right here. So there's import and export and a restore. Now, if you use the export in the dynamic graphics interface, you would create that dynamic graphics definition file that you can then import, and they're just text files, so you can send them to people and they can import them, and it gives you a way to get information moved around without having to have the dynamic graphics interface. That covers the new features for the GTViewer version 20 beta. If you're interested in trying out the beta, please contact support and we'll get you set up with it.